Hello and welcome to episode 1 of EPOCH American History Stories, a new podcast all about the stories and moments that made America the nation it is today. My name's Nick Rogers.
And I am Liam Rogers, and we have only tried to do this intro 3 times
Yes,
now.
absolutely, but hopefully we got it nailed this time. So first, maybe a bit of background about who we are and why we're doing this, because if you hadn't noticed already, we are not from around here. We have a number of American projects and business activities on the go. We are hosting TEDx Orlando, for example, which is coming from 10 years of experiencing TEDx events and organizing TEDx events. We have a range of different interests. I'm a complete nerd about airships and aviation history, and I did a TEDx talk about airships a couple of years ago.
I am probably more of a creative person. I'm into sort of films, music, theatre. We're both into theatre. To be honest, we're both into films and music. We're just into different kinds of things. And I'm not really a history buff. That's my role I play in this podcast. If I'm going to learn about history, it probably is through films and TV shows. I don't think I have actually ever I don't think I've ever read a history book.
So you're going to be asking the dumb questions that people might be thinking of when they're hearing what we're talking about.
I guess I've read some books which are more like biographies of people, which I guess is kind of like a history book because it's a little bit of a history about one person's life. However, I've never really picked up a book and been like, this is a World War II history book. I will read this. I guess I just prefer hearing about history through storytelling, which is what we're going to bring to people.
Exactly. But I guess the difference is I'm a bit of a history nerd. I have lots of history books at different periods, but the country that we keep coming back to, literally and sort of intellectually, is the United States. And I think now is a very good moment to do this kind of show. It's the 200th and 250th anniversary of American independence, of course. But also, we are, this is branded as EPOCH, and this show is just one part of EPOCH, which we envision as a kind of a celebration of American history. And in future, there's going to be musical experiences geared around American history and actual live events geared around American history. But maybe, Liam, we should talk about why America fascinates us so much, because it has done for both of us since we were kids.
Well, I came to America, I think it was at least 6 times on holidays, vacations for our American listeners. When I was a kid, I came to, so me and my 3 sisters, my parents visited we did sort of a road trip. A lot of this hinges around road trips, and we'll talk about that later. But we did a road trip which encompassed like Boston, New York, Pennsylvania, when I think I was like 3 or 4 years old. So, and then we were lucky enough to sort of go back 5 more times all over America. So even before I was a teenager, I'd already sort of experienced quite a lot of America. And I think because I was also a bit like movie obsessed, TV obsessed, for me, it probably felt a little bit like I was inside of the movies. And literally, I have a story one time where we were at the beach in LA, and they were literally filming Baywatch. And this was in the 90s. So this wasn't a throwback. This was in the 90s. They were wearing the red bathing suits. It did nothing for me personally.
Did you see Pamela Anderson?
No, but that would have been amazing.
Or is it David Hasselhoff?
No, it was they weren't. From what I can remember, they weren't like the famous ones. But yeah, they were filming it because it was very clear. But it just, I guess, we went to a lot of different places. We did do like some of the Disney parks, other theme parks. And I think that's another way that a lot of international people, particularly British people, that's their first experience of America. It could be something like Disney World or like going on a road trip, because America is just known for its road trips.
Yes, and we've traveled through a lot of America. So I have a slightly different story. I didn't go to the States for the first time until I was 14, which would be 1999. And that was to Florida, to Disney World with my dad and my sister. But I grew up watching Frasier, and I became utterly obsessed by the idea of the States and by the kind of lifestyle that Frasier lived. And I kind of associated that with America, and I thought, well, that looks like a pretty cool place. I like the idea of living that kind of lifestyle, but I've always been interested in history, and there's this really lazy and, dare I say, quite sort of European attitude that America doesn't have history. It's nonsense, because not only do you have the vast sweep of the American story from actually even before the Revolution through to the present day, but you also have fascinating local stories in the different states and towns and cities and places that make up America. And since, by the way, Liam and I are married, we've been together for 18 years now, and we have been fortunate enough to travel across 28 of the 50 states, and we've visited some of the most consequential places in American history, but also places which, although historical in their own right, maybe it's not clear where they fit in the grand story, but they're just fascinating places, each with their own histories. So for this episode, whilst future episodes we'll have guests on to talk us through some of these incredible moments in US history, we thought it would be a good idea if we both chose 3 places that we have been to that have changed how we see America and its history. So we've each chosen 3. Who do you think should go first, Liam? To talk about me? Okay.
Because that's how we've got it in our list.
Yeah, that's what it is in our notes.
We do have some plans about what we're going to talk about.
So, okay, let's start with the battlefield of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania.
I think this is a good one to start with because it's really history. This isn't like fake history. This is really, really history.
Yeah, this is proper history. We visited this. We visited Gettysburg in 2017, and it was part of a road trip we were doing from upstate New York that went through Pennsylvania, the Midwest, and ended up in Chicago. And let me tell you, there was a lot of cornfields on that road trip. It was like cornfield, signs saying "Hell is real," cornfield. It was maybe a boring drive, but some amazing places that we visited along the way.
It was, and as the one that did all the driving, it was a really boring drive. That's the road trip I use as an example to people, that even though America is like a road trip place, some of it is not. It's so boring. Yes. But the cities we visited were nice. Just the actual literal driving was incredibly boring.
But I think we came to Gettysburg the day after we'd been to Washington, D.C. So we'd spent some time in Washington, D.C., and then drove to Gettysburg. And actually, the place that we visited after Gettysburg, I won't say what it is yet, but that's Liam's first choice as well. And it's also within the state of Pennsylvania. But just to ground people in some core facts about why Gettysburg as a place is important. Obviously, it's the site of the Battle of Gettysburg, which was fought from the 1st of July to the 3rd of July, 1863. And apart from that, I often feel this is the case with towns where there's a major battle or something major happened to them. Really lovely little town in its own right, and it would be a beautiful place, kind of a bit like Normandy in France. It would be a beautiful place that you would enjoy visiting, but because of the history that happened there, it completely changes how you view the town. But with Gettysburg, this was part of the Civil War, often described as the turning point in the Civil War. So General Robert E. Lee of the Confederacy was invading the North, the Union, and he met the army of Major General George Meade at Gettysburg. And what resulted was one of the bloodiest battles in American history, with around 50,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, or captured. It was a 3-day battle in and around the town of Gettysburg, and it kind of represented what they say as the high water mark of the Confederacy. It's the furthest north that they got. But what I found interesting about it is that and it's often the way with battlefields, because so much of a battle is based on the landscape, you can really stand and understand the ebb and flow of the battlefield. But with that said, it's a 3-day battle. It took place across a huge geographical area. And when we decided we wanted to go, I thought...
When you decided you wanted to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, we're doing this road trip. We're going to Gettysburg. But I did think, how on earth are we going to see this entire battlefield in one day, but make it a meaningful experience? Because it's too big to walk, and driving didn't feel like you'd get the right kind of experience. So, Liam, what was our solution?
Well, this is one of those situations where Nick would make a suggestion like this. I don't know what it's going to look like. To me, it could just literally be a field. We have been to battlefields in the UK, such as the one that is in Battle, named after that battle. That's why they call it Battle, I guess. And it is basically just a field. I know that's a very different battle.
That's the Battle of Hastings.
Yes, I know. The Battle of Hastings in a place called Battle. So it is kind of just a field. So my... being, I like experiences. I like to see things come to life, I guess. Anytime there's a museum, I'm like, as long as there's some sort of like, you're in the middle of it, put you in the experience. But the thing that sold me was when you said, yeah, you were going through this deliberation of like, well, we could drive around. And I probably was like, I've already been driving for thousands of miles, or I am going to on this entire trip. Walking it, just doesn't sound like it's the right thing to do. And then you said the words, Segway. Wait, it is one word, isn't it? Not two words. And I was like, Segway. And actually, probably initially, I was like, oh no, I'm going to fall off a Segway and hurt myself. But way more fun than walking or driving or getting on a bicycle. So yeah, I was sold with the word Segway.
It was pretty cool to do the Segway tour because you were in a little sort of group of maybe 8 people with a guide who was dressed in like these weird steampunk goggles. Bit of an eccentric guy.
Didn't he have a grandfather or great-grandfather that was involved?
Yes, he did, which is why one of the reasons he was so interested in the battle. But what it meant was that we could experience the entire battlefield in one day. That this Segway tour, we would, after a little training session.
That was actually fun. That was probably the most fun part.
It was like assault course.
In a little building going up and down hills and knowing how to stop.
But we all went out in a little convoy through the town of Gettysburg, out to the Lutheran seminary, where around which some of the first fighting took place when Confederate cavalry was tussling with General Reynolds' troops, and then we were able to literally follow the geography of the battle on our segways up and down hills, up and down the rocky outcrops, because it is a very hilly sort of battlefield.
It's quite an interesting landscape. Like it actually, you can, when they're explaining things, you can kind of see it coming to life because it's quite hilly and it's not just a field, as I was thinking.
Exactly, because it's this massive battle that changed over time, and there's this commonly used description of the Union Army ending up looking like a fish hook because they are sort of bent around these the high ground around Gettysburg, and on a Segway you can just zip up to these places
and maybe fall off them.
Well, you kind of had a little accident.
No, what happened is it was just me and Nick and maybe 4 or 5 other people. I think they were all in one group, and they were an older group. No offense to the older people in the audience, but there was one older guy who was kind of struggling quite a lot, and then so he, as we were going up a hill, almost fell off, did this whole swerving thing, but I was right behind him, so then I almost crashed into him. But it was a situation where I had to like not crash it but step off, and the Segway kind of moves with your body, so when you're on it, it does feel kind of normal if you're going with the flow, but the moment that you feel like you're going to step off, the moment it feels all a bit like you're definitely going to fall off, or you're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to flip yourself over. But yeah, so it wasn't my fault, it was that old man's fault.
But did you have a favorite part of visiting Gettysburg?
Genuinely, I actually can't remember any of it. This is what I'm talking about, experiences. I remember it because of the Segways, not because of what the man told us.
Well, my favorite part was Little Round Top. And if anyone's seen the movie Gettysburg, This is all about Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, who's played by Jeff Daniels. I don't think, Liam, you've seen that film, have you? I mean, a 4.5-hour film about a Civil War battle probably isn't.
No, I don't think so.
Up your street. But this came on day 2 of Gettysburg, and Joshua Chamberlain with the 20th Maine Regiment was right at the very southern end of the Union line on the high ground of the Little Round Top. So this is like a critical place, because if he's pushed back, or if the Union loses this high ground, then their flank is exposed. And if you see the layout of the Union force, it is like that fishhook. If their southern flank's exposed, the Confederate army could just roll them right up along those hills. So it's critical that he holds this ground. And in fact, his order is to hold at all hazards. And you had Confederate forces repeatedly attacking uphill again and again and again. And Joshua Chamberlain and his soldiers are running out of ammunition. So he does something incredible. He orders his men to conduct a bayonet charge downhill, and they kind of swing out in the movie. He talks about swinging out like a door, completely taking the Confederates by surprise. Their line breaks and the Union line holds, and so this was a critical moment of defense. And what I like about it is it's a classic military history story, because you've got the importance of geography, you've got the importance of leadership, and you've got the importance of flair and innovation, all coming together for a critical point. So I found it quite moving to stand there. And that was 154 years after the battle, and although it's a long time ago, it still feels very real and very, very present. It's a very well preserved battle.
Do they have the monuments throughout?
Yes, they do, and I think
that's the thing
mean.
I remember the most.
Pretty much, so many of the different regiments, commanders, they have specific monuments for them. So it's a very rich place to visit. It rewards the time that you spend there. And
the monuments just means that there are always sort of like visual markers throughout the entire landscape. So there's always something to look at and then see, even just like the designs, how they've designed them all differently.
Exactly. But after that, like that evening, we went off and we stayed overnight in this slightly weird log cabin lodge thing next to a little zoo. With
a hot tub in the room.
A hot tub in the room.
And it wasn't like a upcharge, you want a hot tub in your room. Every room had a hot tub in the room.
And they were a little bit strange.
We actually did... it's not TMI. Obviously there was a hot tub in the room, so we got in the hot tub. Do you know what film we watched in that hot tub? Can you remember?
I don't remember.
It's related to the podcast.
What was it?
Saving Private Ryan.
No, seriously, really?
I don't think we chose to watch it. I think it was just American on history. The TV.
No, that's a great historical movie.
So there you go.
Yeah.
I can't believe you don't remember it. I don't know.
I don't remember.
See, this is the thing. I can't remember anything about the Gettysburg information that man gave us, but I can remember the film we watched in the hot tub at the hotel.
But the day after, we visited your first place on our list. So do you want to take us through that?
And we didn't choose these just because we happened to see them one day after the other. This was just one of the ones I wanted to choose, and then we realized, we saw this one the day after Gettysburg. So this is one of America's most famous houses, buildings, pieces of architecture, and it is called Fallingwater. Now, if you're not an architect person, you may have heard of it, or if you saw a picture of it, which we'll share some pictures of it. If you saw a picture, you might think, I do recognize that. Well, this is designed by architect Frank Lloyd Wright, who is commonly known as sort of like the grandfather of American architect, one of the greatest architects on the planet, but also definitely one of the greatest American architects. He really sort of redefined architect for the mid-century, even though he kind of was doing it even before the sort of mid-century, sort of like mid-century architecture. And a lot of architects that came after him were people that studied under him, because he had a architecture school in Chicago, isn't it? We went to see it, didn't we?
He had a few.
He had multiple,
schools.
didn't he?
Yeah.
Anyway, we went to see one that he had in Chicago. So this was a house that was designed in 1935, commissioned by Edgar J. Kaufman Sr., a very catchy name. And he was a Pittsburgh department store owner. So Pittsburgh sort of not being too far away from rural Pennsylvania. But this house really is genuinely in the middle of nowhere, in the woods. It was completed, I think the initial house was completed in 1937, but they actually added on to it. So I think one of the bedrooms that's kind of high up and it's behind it. So I think it was officially fully finished in 1939. But yes, as I just said, it was built over a waterfall in rural Pennsylvania. Now, built over the waterfall is quite key to the sort of reason why this is such an iconic building. So when the Kaufman family went to visit the site, I think they owned the land and they used to camp there and they used to visit there, but there was obviously a waterfall there. And there is, as it is now, there's this amazing, perfect view of the house, and that's the site of where they thought that Frank Lloyd Wright would want to build the house. So build it on this plot of land that sort of perfectly overlooks the waterfall. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright being the man he was, and he did this with a lot of buildings in terms of trying to merge the building with the landscape, he was like, no, we're not doing that. We are literally going to build the house on the waterfall. So hence the name Fallingwater. And when you are inside of the house, from the living room, there are stairs that literally take you down and you can walk on the waterfall. It's quite amazing. And the sound of the waterfall completely consumes the house when you're inside of it. So even that alone for 1935 was just a radical thing to do. And then obviously it became a bit of an engineering challenge to be able to do that. But what's interesting now is that the spot where they thought he was going to build the house is now kind of the perfect view of the house. It's almost like not only did he say we're going to put it on the waterfall, but we're going to make it so that the place where you thought your house was going to be built is now the view of Fallingwater. So if you Google it, although we are going to share some images, that site where almost every single photo of the building is taken was the original place where they thought the house was going to be. So it's kind of an interesting way that he sort of flipped all of that on its head.
Well, one of the things I liked about it was that they had this rock that they would enjoy sort of reclining on in the sunshine next to the waterfall, and rather than demolish that or build on top of it, Wright actually incorporated it into the living room, so they can still sit on that rock, but it's now part of the living room. And I mean, Fallingwater is not just a nice home. It did change how we saw architecture, and it changed the course of architecture. And it was kind of one of the first expressions of organic architecture, which is the idea that rather than houses being placed so they would look out at nice views, that they were actually part of it, that they were integrated into the landscape itself. And so many of Liam says that this was sort of almost mid-century before mid-century was a thing. You've got strong horizontal lines of very famous cantilevers, big open interior spaces. Wright sort of, we've visited a number of Wright houses, and he kind of invented the idea of open planned living, which is obviously probably the most popular layout for interior residential design at the moment. But I don't know. I think it's
not a boring house to walk around as well.
Not at all.
We have visited some houses that are architecturally really interesting, but they're so formal in the way that they're put together. There are sort of no surprises in the way that you walk around them. It's just room to room to room, and it's just very expected when you're walking around. And this is something that Frank Lloyd Wright did in an amazing way. We've seen, as Nick said, we've seen a few of his other houses. Some even more so than Fallingwater, just reveal themselves and uncover, and they seem very complicated, and they kind of are in the way that they're constructed, but he just did something so impressive with sort of the idea of compression and release,
Yeah.
compression and release. So effectively, the definition of that would almost be like you walk through the front door and it's in a very enclosed space, almost like you're walking through a tunnel, but it just means the ceilings are low and the walls are kind of come in. And then as you walk into the open plan space, it releases out. That's the most sort of simple version. But he would do that kind of consistently throughout houses. Even the idea of making staircases just actually really small and tight, because you sort of go into the compression space and then it's released into a more open space. But it's just not, and it's a very interesting, you feel like you're going on a journey as you're walking around this building, and you kind of see that from the outside as well. It's not, even though it's sort of straight lines and blocks and cantilevers, it's just not particularly formally put together. It's very interestingly put together.
It's a fascinating house, and it's, I don't know. We've both been sort of architecture buffs for years, and it's always somewhere I've wanted to go. And I thought, well, whenever am I going to be in rural Pennsylvania? But then this idea for this road trip sort of came together, and it was, well, how could we not go there? And it felt, for me, it did feel like a pilgrimage. And
that's what I was literally going to say too. It feels a bit like, and it helps that it is kind of in the middle of nowhere. You really have to make the effort to go there.
Yeah, it's in the middle of nowhere. You've made an effort to go there. And when you do go there, you're in this amazing sort of unique environment where everything is quiet. All you can hear is the sound of the waterfall and the singing of the birds. And you're surrounded by this incredible architecture and this beautiful design. It was astonishing, and we've been to a number of Frank Lloyd Wright's of homes across the states, but that will definitely stay with me for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I feel like we could do an entire, and we probably will do an entire episode on Frank Lloyd Wright, and we can then talk about some of the other buildings we've seen, which are amazing. And also one of the things he would do was actually build all the furniture in all the houses as well. It's almost never would have like you're not going to see IKEA furniture in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. No. But what I mean is he would actually make the furniture to fit the houses as well. So that is Fallingwater. I recommend visiting. But also I feel like that's just something that Nick and I really love, is architecture of buildings, but then the stories behind the architecture. And I would say in some ways Fallingwater is this iconic building, and maybe there are definitely going to be more stories to it and the family that owned it. But there are so many buildings out there that are like a little window into history because of the stories about how they were built, why they were built, the architecture, but then the sort of interesting things that happened there. But let's move on to Nick's second choice. Right, Nick, what is your second choice?
So actually, it connects very much to what you were literally just saying.
Oh, isn't that convenient? Yeah. And I didn't even think about that.
my second choice is Sunnylands in Rancho Mirage, California. And we were there in 2018, the year after we were at Gettysburg and Fallingwater. And I mentioned that we're architecture nerds, especially mid-century modern architecture. So for us, Palm Springs was, I know, bloody love that place. But Palm Springs,
I was maybe thinking about having just in the entirety of Palm Springs as one of my things.
But that city, Palm Springs, has always been on our list as somewhere that we wanted to go, because it is pure mid-century modern. Like it's a museum, but it's not a museum because it's a lived-in city, and there's all kinds of cool places to go. So Rancho Mirage is near Palm Springs, and Sunnylands is a mid-century modern estate. And I think it's unusual in mid-century modern residential architecture for just how big it is, on what scale it is. And it was designed by A. Quincy Jones for Walter and Leonore Annenberg. And Walter Annenberg himself is a very interesting person, as is his wife. He was the owner of a publishing company that published, amongst other things, TV Guide, which is, I think, a magazine that probably, millions and millions of Americans will have read or used in their lifetime.
Also, you said his name was A. Quincy Jones, not the Quincy Jones that's probably more famously known as being the producer of albums like Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller. Yeah. Not the same different man. People. He was talented, but not that talented to also be an architect.
No. Different people. Walter Annenberg also was a lifelong sort of political animal, big donor to Republican Party causes, and as well as being a huge philanthropist. Apparently, over his lifetime, he donated over $2 billion to various schools, libraries, theaters, hospitals, and museums, and other institutions. But he also was the American ambassador to the Court of St. James, i.e., to the United Kingdom under Nixon and Ford, and he built Sunnylands. When he was building it, he envisaged it as kind of the Camp David of the West, a place where he and his wife could live and have a fantastic lifestyle, but also a place where the great and good of the world, the serious global leaders, could come together in a quiet place for summits and powwows to talk about the weighty issues of state.
And he had a lot of pictures of him with all of these people. This is one of those houses where he is not making it subtle that he's met all the presidents and all of the leaders and all of the famous people, because there's pictures of him everywhere.
Well, when we walked in to the lobby, I was like, Liam, what's that smell? It's power.
And
it
money.
Kind of oozes everywhere. And yeah, Liam's right. Walter Annenberg's office is just wall to wall, like ego, basically, of the people that you've met. And they had some incredibly well-known people who visited and stayed at Sunnylands. So Ron and Nancy Reagan, Bing Crosby, the Queen Elizabeth II, Margaret Thatcher. Interestingly, it's where the former Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, stayed after he was deposed in Iran. Quite topical, given that his son is very much in the news with the conflict in Iran at the moment. It became a retreat for a lot of these famous people, and the Reagans would often celebrate New Year at Sunnylands.
Sounds lovely.
I know. I bet their parties were legendary. But they the kind of vision that they had for Sunnylands carries on into the modern era, because even in 2013, Barack Obama was hosting the president of China for talks and to build that relationship.
How do we get an invite?
I know. Well, I think we need the podcast to do quite well.
Come on, listen to the podcast. Get us to Sunnylands, and we'll talk about it again. So you haven't mentioned the thing that I remember the most about Sunnylands in the rooms,
which is
the M&Ms. Or was it no wait?
No,
jelly beans. Sorry, yes, the jelly beans.
The jelly beans. Yes.
See, again, this is the kind of thing, like, I could forget the entire other visit, but the jelly beans was the thing that I remembered. So do you want to tell?
No.
Can you remember?
You tell about the jelly beans.
Well, as far as I can remember, every room just was named after a color. So the rooms where the guests would stay, and
which were like, they were sort of like cabins almost.
Yeah, but nothing like, they weren't ostentatious. The house itself is huge. Like, for the time, it was definitely like a big house for the time. But like the rooms were just sort of relatively standard. But yeah, each room had a different color. And then what was kind of cool, because it's one of those places where so many famous people or like leaders have stayed there. Each room would be like, who stayed in this room that one time? Margaret Thatcher, this person, that other person that I can't think of the names of. But yeah, so each room was like the yellow room, the green room, the blue room. And then they would have like jelly beans that were only that color in each room, which is just, what a ridiculous detail and such a pointless thing to do. But that's obviously the thing that I remembered about each room.
Do you think someone had to buy a whole bunch of packets of jelly beans
and split them up,
pick the individual colors out?
Yeah, that was probably someone's full-time job. There's something about that, like how eccentric and weird, but also entirely pointless. And also, what if you're like, I don't love the green jelly bean, so what if I'm in the green room and I want the red one?
I know. You do you think you were able to sort of make a request as to which room you're in.
More so about the jelly bean color, not the actual room or what it's facing. Although, I can't I'm downplaying. It's obviously really nice. The landscape's amazing. The building's amazing. But each room just felt very kind of like just basically like a hotel room.
Yeah, they weren't. You're right. They weren't ostentatious. But then you step outside, and I said they were cabins. They're not cabins. They are actually in a structure that's kind of separate from the main house. But they do have that feel. But then you step outside that, and you're in the beautiful grounds. It's a golf course. He liked his golf. And you've got the San Jacinto Mountains in the background. You've got a massive swimming pool, a lake, and it's all sort of basked in the Southern California sunshine. I mean,
the architecture, and this was because it's sort of near to Palm Springs, but it's not exactly very close to where Palm Springs downtown is exactly. But yeah, Palm Springs has got so much mid-century modern architecture. However, as we were saying about the time period, not Frank Lloyd Wright. It was after his time in some ways, and he didn't do a heck of a lot. He just didn't do a heck of a lot in California, did he? Really?
He did a few things in California.
Oh, okay.
But
wrong.
his son, Lloyd Wright, has done some famous buildings in California, famous houses in California. Anyway,
but that landscape just really works for like mid-century style.
But the interesting thing about Palm, if we broaden it out slightly and talk about Palm Springs architecturally, is one of the very first people who had built their sort of house in the Palm Springs area was Frank Sinatra.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yes, he was a visitor at Sunnylands, and actually on our way back from Sunnylands to Palm Springs, we went to the cemetery where Frank Sinatra is buried. But Sinatra was one of the first people to have their house built in Palm Springs. The reason people went there was basically to do with the old Hollywood studio system, where their contracts forbade them, these stars, from straying within or more than 2 hours from the studio whilst they were filming.
Yeah, they couldn't be 2 hours drive away from Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. And Palm Springs was about 2 hours.
Not today, though. Not with traffic.
Oh my God, no! It takes you forever.
I think if you were like from point to point with no traffic, it is probably about 2 hours. But these days, if you do the drive, because if you fly into LAX and then you go to Palm Springs, it probably takes more like 3 hours, if not sometimes longer. But I do love that detail of like they were not allowed to go more than 2 hours away, but Palm Springs is exactly 2 hours, so it became like a Hollywood getaway sanctuary, which it kind of still is today in many ways.
Yeah, it still is, and I think it's gone through a sort of I think there was maybe a slight dip when people didn't really appreciate the value of the architecture that they have there, but now it's like it's really, these houses are so prized, and the food scene there is incredible. But Sinatra, he walked into the office of E. Stuart Williams, who became one of the sort of 4 or 5 most significant and influential architects in Palm Springs. And apparently Sinatra was wearing a sailor cap and eating an ice cream cone, and asked E. Stuart Williams to build him a Georgian-style house as a weekend residence. And Williams thought, well, I'm going to build a Georgian-style house in the middle of the desert. How weird is that going to be?
Thank God they didn't.
Well, yeah, and he showed him. He's like, well, this is what a Georgian house would look like, but this is what a mid-century modern sort of single-story ranch-style home would look like too. And Sinatra chose the modern one, and that is really the template for how all of the rest of the residential architecture in Palm Springs has developed. And a detail I love about Frank Sinatra's house.
You're touching on our Palm Springs episode. This is all going to come up in our Palm Springs episode.
We are going to be doing an entire episode on Palm Springs. But just to finish,
there's loads of stories to tell about Palm
Springs. He would, because his house was at the time in the middle of nowhere. Now it's surrounded by other houses. But apparently, when he was having a party, to signal to people, to his friends, that they could come over for a cocktail, on the flagpole, he would run up a flag with the Jack Daniels logo on it, which I absolutely love. And if I'd seen that, I'd have been straight around to Frank's house for a cocktail.
I think he also had palm trees that he lit up as well.
Yes.
I thought that was it. So then on the beacon on the horizon you could see the palm trees
and
Frank Sinatra's
the flag,
house.
and that's party time.
Which seems strange. I'm in my head. I'm like picturing people literally driving through the desert, like there's no roads, but there must have been roads.
So that was so that's Sunnylands, a bit of Palm Springs. One interesting thing to just reflect back on: the Kaufmans were the family who commissioned Fallingwater. They also commissioned a desert residence in Palm Springs. And we saw that house as well whilst we were out there. So interesting little balance to that trip. But now I think, why don't we move on to your next choice, Liam, which is also similar in the sense, into Sunnylands, in the sense that it's hosted some of the most interesting, powerful people of the time when it was built.
And just one more note about that Kaufman Desert House. It is also probably one of the most iconic houses in Palm Springs. So this,
oh yeah, really famous.
Yeah, and it's it was famously used in a movie in the last couple of years, but I can't think of what that movie was called.
Well,
it had
also
Florence Pugh in it, but they don't film there very often. But this film got permission to film there.
Also, very famous photograph called Poolside Gossip.
Yeah, so there was something about the Kaufmans. They were like really in tune with like iconic architecture. We can aspire to be those people.
Oh yeah, one day.
So yeah, my next choice is also in California. This was sort of a coincidence that all three of our choices are all three in the same states. Basically, we split them into.
Yeah, we've got 2, 2, and 2, haven't
we?
Two,
2 and 2.
Two
so
Pennsylvania, 2 California, and then I won't spoil.
2 somewhere else, but my hat is a clue. So my second choice is, and it kind of does. There's connections both to Fallingwater and connections to Sunnylands and Palm Springs, partly because of the famous people that went to this house. Now, I already said that I am like a big movie fan, and I do love like classic Hollywood movies, but we have been to Hollywood, and you know what's a bit disappointing about Hollywood these days? There is not a lot of like classic Hollywood in Hollywood anymore. Probably, I mean, you still got obviously like the Hollywood sign, but that's you just see that.
The Henson Studios.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Only one?
The Jim Henson Studios, which started off as the Charlie Chaplin Studios, and actually recently was sort of somewhat under threat that someone had bought it and was maybe going to do something with it, but they are actually going to keep it as is, or they're going to restore it and not basically tear it down and put something else there, but it was always under threat. But that's one of the only sort of like original movie studios that's still sort of in existence. But there's just something a little bit disappointing about Hollywood, that all of the classic Hollywood things are just not really there anymore. But this place, my choice is Hearst Castle. So it's located in San Simeon in California. It's on is it Route 1? Mm-hmm, yep. Route 1. So if you do that, like whenever we're talking about road trips, the famous, like probably the most famous American road trip is to do south on Route 1
Route
or
66.
Okay, Route 66. But when I'm talking one of the most, it's basically like the California road trip. You could go south on it, so you'd sort of go. Basically sort of like San Francisco down to LA, or LA up to San Francisco, and you can go a bit further or a bit more southernly. But we did San Francisco down to LA. Side note, we also both got really sick on this trip, so it wasn't actually that much fun for us, and I had to do all the driving. Luckily, we managed to get heat stroke in San Francisco.
Walking across the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, we didn't just walk across the Golden Gate Bridge. It was like 20 kilometers through the city. Yeah. On a bizarrely hot day.
It was like freakishly hot, and we just did not plan for that. Anyway, luckily I was feeling okay by the time we did this drive.
But there is, not to keep interrupting, there is another detail, which is I booked the rental car, even though I wasn't driving, and Liam would normally do it. And I basically messed up the dates.
Yeah.
And so we turned up at this rental car place in San Francisco, neither of us feeling that amazing, looking to pick up our Hyundai Tucson or whatever. And they were like, I'm afraid you got the wrong day. The only thing that we have available for you is this. It's a Ram 1500. And I'll try and put a picture in if we can find one. But it was so huge.
American listeners will know what that car is, but for international listeners, it's basically like a pickup truck.
Massive pickup truck.
Which, if you're not from America and you don't drive that kind of car, it looks huge.
And also, you'd never have any experience of driving something like that. And then you had to navigate this through the winding Route 1 along the California coast.
I literally saw it and I was like,
terribly well.
I'm not driving that. I'm not driving that. Which actually now I would feel more like, yeah, give it to me. I'm going to drive that. But I don't know why at the time I was like, because I knew that the road trip, it's almost like the cliffs down to the ocean. And I just thought, oh God, I don't want to be so high up in a car when you're like kind of doing these windy roads along the coast. Anyway, it was fine.
And we had a stop in Carmel.
And you were so sick you couldn't even leave the
it was
in
Clint
the hotel
Eastwood's
room.
hotel, the Mission Ranch, I think it's called. And it looked lovely, but I was so ill I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave the bed.
This
and by
road
the
trip,
next day, I was feeling a little bit better, but not that better.
this road trip was a little bit of a bust, apart from Hearst Castle. So I didn't really know what to expect. This is another one of those things where you were like, let's go to Hearst Castle, and you booked the tour, and I was just like, cool. You probably were like, there's famous people went there, and I was like, cool. But this was constructed in 1919, so this is pre-mid-century modern, and this is what even actually is the architectural style of this building. It is like neoclassical. It is like incredibly ostentatious. It was built for the newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. Now, he was obviously an incredibly wealthy gentleman, and yeah, it took 3 decades to build this house, but it was notable for being...
Almost a house doesn't really do it justice, does it? It's an incredible place.
But
it's a residence, but still.
But it is this kind of like neoclassical, like it harkens back to like Rome and like
I think Spanish.
Spanish, yeah, like
colonial
Spanish, but then like Roman. It just what was interesting about this. So Julia Morgan, and yes, Julia Morgan is a lady. She was I think the first female licensed architect in California. So for the time, it was quite unusual for him to choose a female architect to help him. In many ways, though, it was probably like a blessing and a curse, because he was the kind of person who constantly changed his mind, was constantly wanting to add more things onto it. Literal flaws, like, you know, I don't know, a 2-story part of the house, and he's like, now we're going to add on an extra floor. And you can kind of see it in the architecture. It is very unusual. It's very sort of like higgledy-piggledy, as we might say in the UK. Very interesting, but sort of ostentatious and just very difficult, to be honest, to define exactly what this architectural style is. Yeah, it's kind of Spanish, sort of neoclassical, but then inside of the building, he would literally I've bought the ceiling of an Italian church from the 1600s, and now we're going to, and he's going to get it, he'll import it over from Europe. Now we're going to build this room around this wooden ceiling. And so when you're inside, it feels like that sort of like Hollywood mansion that you would have got in the Hollywood Hills, which would have not often have been like a sort of Spanish revival style. But this is that on another level, because it is just huge. And it's on the top of the sort of like, I want to say hill, but it's probably more of a mountainside. And also it was basically a zoo. It was like surrounded by animals. Like I think there were giraffes and everything, but it became this kind of retreat for Hollywood celebrities and often sort of like world leaders. So some of the heavyweight famous people that went there was Winston Churchill. We've already heard Winston Churchill. President Calvin Coolidge. Hollywood royalty such as Charlie Chaplin, Cary Grant, Greta Garbo, Clark Gable, the Marx Brothers, Mary Pickford, Buster Keaton, Jean Harlow. Aviation legends like Charles Lindbergh and Howard Hughes. And then writers like George Bernard Shaw and P.G. Wodehouse. But there probably was loads of other people, but those are just some of the more notable. And he would often sort of invite them all together. So it would be like, come for the weekend. And it would be a sort of almost like a random collection of people. And I think some of the regulars were such regulars, they would almost have their own room, because there's, again, I should have looked this up, but there are a lot of bedrooms in this house. And I think people like Cary Grant would be like, I have my own room when I come to stay at Hearst Castle, because he was a regular attendee. So it's just, and there's like a cinema screening room there. There's this incredible swimming pool as well.
Both there's an indoor swimming pool, which is
an indoor,
just so beautifully designed, and then
but it's not. It doesn't have any water in it anymore. A lot of these are indoor swimming pools, but the outdoor swimming pool, which is kind of covered, but it's outdoor. Wait, am I thinking of the wrong thing?
It's not covered.
Oh, you know what I'm thinking of? The swimming pool at what's the biggest house in America?
Biltmore. Yeah,
Biltmore.
Biltmore. That's
Okay,
another
that's
incredible
not on the
swimming
list,
pool.
but I'm talking about that one. They
You
have
could
an
do an you could we definitely could do an episode about Biltmore. That's an
but they have an
incredible
indoor
place.
swimming pool, but it's like empty because it keeps leaking. So no, sorry, Hearst Castle has this incredible indoor swimming pool and this incredible outdoor swimming pool. Yeah, it's just something amazing. But it's like ostentatious in only they would have done in like the 1920s. It was just on a kind of another level.
Well, Hearst is interesting because he basically was living there in sin with his mistress Marion Davis, who was the chatelaine of his castle, and Churchill visited in 1929. And he wrote a letter to his wife Clemmy. They always, they were throughout their entire marriage. They wrote all these fascinating letters to each other. And he writes of being utterly charmed by Marion Davis, and was fascinated by the sheer luxury of Hearst Castle. He describes William Randolph Hearst directing his newspapers by telephone all day long. He met Charlie Chaplin and became great friends with him before he moved on he was doing a tour of America and California. But Hearst is himself, not just because of the slightly bizarre nature of the architecture of Hearst Castle, but as a person, just a fascinating man. In many ways, the inventor of the idea of tabloid newspapers, or at least popularizer of those. And for me, as an airship guy, he and his papers sponsored so many of the Grab Zeppelin's amazing adventures, the round the world flight, the polar flight, and things like that. And of course, famously, Hearst being the model for Citizen Kane.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. So, the sort of classic Hollywood movie, one of the greatest, commonly voted one of the greatest films of all time. And it actually, you know what? It actually is a really good film. Sometimes those films are not, don't quite live up to the hype, but actually, I think Citizen Kane is an amazing film, directed by Orson Welles. And yeah, he is Charles Foster Kane. Is it Charles Foster Kane?
Charles Foster Kane.
He is the William Randolph Hearst in Citizen Kane. And it's an amazing movie. So, and actually imagine that, like, he had all these Hollywood stars come to his house and then they actually made a movie about him. Although Citizen Kane, when it first came out, was not a big hit. So maybe he was a bit embarrassed by the fact that the film that's emulating his life, maybe it wasn't a particularly big hit. It's only over time that it became sort of famous and voted one of the best films of all time. Oh, another thing about William Randolph Hearst is, if anyone knows about true crime, Patty Hearst, who famously got kidnapped, went missing. It's a very strange story in the 70s. She is his granddaughter. And she's still alive. And I do remember when we visited, they did say how the Hearst family still own the house and they use it for things like private parties. So I have this memory of when we toured it that they were saying, not Patty Hearst, she's like 72 now, but one of her children or her grandchildren was having a party there for her friends at the Hearst Castle and using the swimming pool. So yeah, the family do still own it and they still do use it.
Interesting.
Right, so I think that's enough about Hearst Castle. But yes, do visit. It's a very interesting place. Also, sort of very much in the middle of nowhere. It's very much a journey to be able to get to.
But
Hearst
if you're
Castle.
doing that Route 1 tour, it's 100% worth the stop.
Yeah, definitely. Right, on to your next choice. Now, what state, where in the world of the USA could this one be? And also the next one?
We go from the West Coast to the East Coast, and we go from the sort of the glamour of the 1920s to the very, very early days of Europeans in America. And this is St. Augustine in Florida on the Atlantic coast.
I've been there.
Yes, we've been there. In fact, we've been there twice. We went there in 2015 with our friend Chris, and then we went again in 2023, I think it was. That was part of another road trip we were doing that started in Nashville. That's when we went to Dollywood. That was that trip. But I find St. Augustine fascinating because a lot of the U.S. narrative, or the narrative of American history, basically starts with Jamestown, Plymouth, the Mayflower, and the Pilgrim Fathers. But there were Europeans settling in America well before then, and St. Augustine is the oldest continually inhabited European city in the United States. And this comes against a backdrop of the conquistadors. So these Spanish, they're just kind of, I've heard them described as armed entrepreneurs. They're not really soldiers in the typical sense, but they followed Columbus effectively to the Caribbean and to Central America on the hunt for gold, effectively. And one of them was called Juan Ponce de Leon, and he.
You said that very well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, don't think I could.
Although you know my irrational hatred for when people put on accents for like particularly Spanish names. Ponce de Leon.
Juan Ponce de Leon.
Just say Ponce de Leon.
Ponce de Leon. Well, yes, yeah. Ponce de Leon. He landed on what he thought was a big island in 1513, and he called it La Florida, which is named after the Spanish season that means Feast of Flowers. And he was exploring, claiming territory. Apparently, they say that he was searching for the Fountain of Youth. I don't know how true that is. I mean, it's wonderful if it is true.
How clear was his skin?
Yeah. To be honest, after years and years in the jungles of Latin America, being bitten by all those mosquitoes, I suspect probably not brilliant, and I'm sure that at some point he had a run-in with smallpox, which was a disease that had a devastating impact on the native peoples of Central and Latin America when it was brought over from Europe. And he didn't found St. Augustine, but he did explore nearby there. And it was a Spanish admiral called Pedro de Aviles who founded it in 1565. They built the Spanish built a enormous castle of San Marcos, which if you've been to St. Augustine, you've seen it. It's the oldest masonry fort in the United States. But the town, and this is where the Brits come into it. The town was constantly under attack by English pirates, and there was a period of time where Florida actually was ruled by the English before being basically handed back to the Spanish, and then, of course, independence, and it was an American territory. But when you go to St. Augustine, you walk the streets of this ancient town, and in true American style, they've kind of kitsched a few things up. So the fortress itself is an incredible place to visit, but you've got this colonial quarter that sort of brings the Spanish history part of it to life. There's a museum about the pirates, and I remember when we were there the first time, it absolutely, the heavens, typical Florida, heavens opened, and we ran to the closest place that we could find, which happened to be an English pub.
Yes, it was. It wasn't very English pub, but it was.
Really. It was like a tavern, sort of old school style tavern.
It's a cool place to walk around, partly because it really doesn't feel very American. It does feel quite European in the way that it's laid out, but then also in a weird way, it is sort of, the streets are in the old town, it's kind of like gridded like they would be in an American town. So it's this weird sort of mix of Spanish, European, and American.
But there's a lot going on there. And the first time we were there, I remember after the sort of the rain had cleared up, we noticed that moored out in the river was a huge replica of this Spanish galleon, and that just added to the sort of the historical flavor of it. And in the sort of the main public square, there's an awful lot of monuments and memorials, which are really quite interesting because they all tell slightly different stories. So there's a monument to Juan Ponce de Leon. How's my my pronunciation?
What's his name?
Juan Ponce de Leon. But there's a monument to some civil rights civil rights protesters who protested in the 1960s in St. Augustine. They were jailed, they were beaten, they were faced with loss of employment, but they continued to march in the cause of civil rights. And one of the interesting things is that when we went in 2015, there was a monument to Confederate soldiers who were from Florida, presumably from St. Augustine, and had been killed in the Civil War. Now that has, and we went back in 2023, and that monument has actually been moved. It hasn't been destroyed, but it has been moved elsewhere. And I think that's an interesting, it's an interesting statement of how the way that we mark and remember has changed over the years, and how different attitudes have evolved.
Also a debate, which we won't have now, about how Florida is not really the South, even though it's more southernly, it's more southernly placed than the South. But they do say the more southern you go in Florida, the more northern you're actually going.
Well, that's it.
So it's interesting at that sort of
I think
geopolitics.
Well, it's not quite. It's almost like more regional, regional. Like local ideas of how of people's identity and states' identity. And I think that I mean, you could do multiple episodes on Florida, and we're doing TEDx Orlando. Obviously, we love Florida.
Maybe we will do multiple episodes on Florida.
Exactly. So I think there is a lot of deep and rich and interesting history in Florida. But St. Augustine, obviously, there's the Spanish aspect and the colonial aspect, which is fascinating enough. But what I like about it is that it gives a little foretaste of what Florida has turned into. Just down the road from that square I was talking about with the monuments is Flagler College, which was founded, or began life, shall we say, in 1888 as the Hotel Ponce de Leon. And it was founded by Henry Flagler, who was one of John D. Rockefeller's cronies in Standard Oil. He was an industrialist, fabulously wealthy. And he visited St. Augustine, and he saw the potential for how it and the whole of the eastern Florida coast could become a winter destination for wealthy people from the north of the United States. He built the Florida East Coast Railway, which ran down the Atlantic coast. And if you see all that development along the coast of sort of East Florida down the Atlantic coast, that comes from his railway. And he built this Hotel Ponce de Leon, which was beautiful, lavish, electrified in 1888 in this sort of Spanish revival style. And what he did, that is now actually Flagler College. But what Henry Flagler did was build the infrastructure that enabled modern Florida to emerge. And what happened next is the subject of Liam's next choice.
Right, yes. So my choice, the final one of our 6 that we're talking about, is also in Florida, and it happens to be in Orlando. So my hat is a little bit, for those watching, you can watch this on YouTube, my hat is a bit of a giveaway, and I wore it the whole time just as a little clue. I have a lot of baseball caps, so my goal is maybe to try and wear a different one that somewhat relates to each episode, although I definitely will run out of baseball cap choices if this keeps going. So we are talking about Disney World, or Walt Disney World, as it often gets called. That was actually something because Walt Disney himself did not see Walt Disney World.
No, tragic. Absolutely tragic.
He was obviously heavily involved in the building of Walt Disney World. He chose the site. He was there, but he died 3-4 years before it ever opened. So and that's one reason why we've chosen it. So yeah, Disney World was opened on 1971. It obviously took quite a few years to build. It came after Disneyland. In many ways, Disneyland is sort of the more obvious choice in terms of historical impact, which was built in California in 1955. But in many ways, we're talking about Disney World partly because of more so because of it being like this sort of like this ever-changing piece of history. One of the things about both Disneyland but Disney World is that Walt Disney always wanted it to change. He never wanted it to stay stagnant. He didn't want it to be stuck in the he didn't want it to be stuck in the day that it was built and you're not allowed to touch it. So it is constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, and that's part of the reason why I selected it. So yeah, it is located in Orlando, Florida. It's kind of, if you know Orlando, it's sort of like southwest of like the downtown area. Before Disney World that was there, it was basically orange groves. There was nothing else there. Swampland, orange groves. There's sort of like, we watched this documentary actually the other day about one of the islands that is still there, and there's sort of like a lake and an island that was sort of this central point very near to the Magic Kingdom, which now that there is 4 theme parks there, obviously when it opened in 1971 it was just the Magic Kingdom and I think 2 resorts. So now it's 4 theme parks and probably what, like 20
plus resorts,
20 plus resorts. So it really has grown over time,
and it's its own transport network, its own fire system, its own local government area. It's sort of its own city.
I think what people don't, if people have never been there, people don't understand. It is literally like it's like a huge part of Florida, or a huge part of Orlando. It's like its own huge like city within a city. It's like multiple neighborhoods or zip codes. Like it's almost like its own huge zip code area is Disney World.
This is one of the reasons why it's a worthy place to sit on a list of historical sites, because of partly what Disney's vision was for it. So obviously the Magic Kingdom, which is like a larger, more expansive version of Disneyland, but EPCOT, Walt Disney wanted to build an entire city, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It was going to be a place where people worked, lived, visited, played. It would have been an astonishing place, and you can see a model of his original vision when you get off. Is it Space Mountain?
There's even a tiny people mover.
I can't remember
I
now.
wonder if that means there's a tiny
No, it's on the people movie.
On the people,
You see the model.
a little glimpse. You go past it.
Yeah, so there's the ride Space Mountain, which is an indoor roller coaster. It's pretty iconic. It's one of the only rides that's sort of like at every single one of the Disney theme parks around the world. But yeah, they're at the Magic Kingdom. I think it used to be at Disneyland and then it closed, so people want that to come back if that was a possibility. Although, as we're talking about history always evolving, normally if they take something away, they do not put it back.
No.
So there's a people mover. It's this little ride that kind of goes around the whole land, and it kind of goes inside of the ride of Space Mountain around the edges, and as you're going past one part, it shows you the model of the original Epcot that was the city of the future.
But the impact of Disney World is, I mean, it's felt globally, but also massive for Central Florida. Before Disney World, Orlando was quiet regional city, sort of citrus groves, that sort of thing. Nothing too exciting. But Disney World came and brought the hospitality industry to it, and that completely has shaped the local economy, but also the demographics of the area. It's quite a young area, and the population has exploded and continues to explode.
It's the very definition of when you're like, it put that place on the map.
Yeah,
well,
100%.
literally, Disney World put Orlando on the map.
Exactly. And then with that came the changes in the expansion of infrastructure, Orlando Airport becoming an international tourist hub. And it's now one of the places, certainly when you think about British people, if a Brit has gone to America, they are quite likely, more than any other place, to have gone to Orlando.
But they've probably not really seen Orlando, which is a whole other episode.
Exactly.
Because we are in the process of relocating to Orlando. So we've been there quite a lot, and we've like uncovered it as we've gone along as well. You know, most of the times we were visiting as tourists, not as sort of people who are thinking about being there on a longer term basis. But there is so much more to that city than people realize. And Disney World is just one amazing part of it. One little fun tidbit about Disney World, which if you're a Disney person, you'll know this. You'll be like, everyone knows that, but probably people don't. For example, the Magic Kingdom, which is the original park, is actually built on, well, if you're American, it's built on the second floor. If you're British, it's built on the first floor, because we call the ground floor and not the first floor. But basically, it is elevated above the ground. And And this was something that they didn't do at Disneyland, but I think probably just engineering-wise it didn't work, or they just didn't have this idea yet. But one of the things that Walt really didn't like about Disneyland was the idea of characters that belong in one of the lands crossing over to another land. So you don't want to see someone
break the magic.
Yeah, you don't want a character from Fantasyland walking through the frontier land. So that's the solution that they had for Disney, the Magic Kingdom at Disney World. They built it kind of on the first or second floor, and so under quite a lot of the Magic Kingdom are tunnels and strategic points you obviously don't see. It's all very secretive. You don't see the sort of where you go down into the tunnels or not. It's all behind the scenes. But yeah, there's like a tunnel system underneath the park.
Utility doors.
Yeah, utility doors. And if you meet a cast member, Disney calls them cast members, and they call it backstage, not like behind the scenes. It's backstage. Odds are, if they've ever worked in the Magic Kingdom, you're like, tell me about the utility doors. And I don't think it's actually that exciting, but it's just an interesting thing that if you were just visiting, you would have no idea. But it also was the only time that they did that. They didn't even do that for the 3 other parks that were put into Disney World, which was Epcot, originally MGM Studio, but then became Hollywood Studio, and then Animal Kingdom was, I think, opened in sort of like 1999, 2000, around that sort of time. And since then, they've not built any new parks, but it's still pretty big. And there's a lot to see. And really, in some ways, although it's Walt Disney World, Roy Disney was Walt Disney's brother, and he was the one that sort of saw it through to completion. So in some ways, Disneyland is kind of really, truly like Walt's place. And if we're being sort of like kind to Roy and giving him a little bit more of a moment in the spotlight, in some ways Walt Disney World is a little bit more of a tribute to the vision of Walt, but Roy Disney was the one that actually brought it to life.
His resilience and his ability to take Walt's vision and do all the boring finance stuff and admin stuff that would make it actually happen.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about the architecture to death on this particular episode, but trust me, it's going to come up again. The resorts are very interesting as well. Like, for example, the Polynesian Resort, which was one of the first ones to open in 1971, is this sort of like mid-century modern style resort, which is all themed to like Polynesia, Hawaiian themed, and it's quite amazing when you visit that one. And then there's the Contemporary Resort, which is also, again, quite mid-century modern. There's sort of the architecture of Disney World and also a lot of Florida is quite postmodern, so not specifically like it's like on the cusp of mid-century and into postmodern. And someone's going to be like, what's postmodern architecture? And you know what? I can't be bothered to explain it right now. We'll have to do that on another episode. Look it up. Google it. But yeah, that's, if we were trying to define the architecture of Disney World or Orlando, it's definitely sort of more on the sort of postmodern edge.
But that's one of the reasons why Florida's just a fascinating state, because you've got St. Augustine, and you drive, I think, just over an hour, and you're at Disney World, one of the most modern places that you can get. And
I think I touched on this, but it's the idea of it always changing. But also Disney World is a part of history. Like, it's now been open for over 50 years. But also it's a place where it is built around vacation, escapism, going there for experiences. And like Disney World is all about going there at various different ages and having an amazing experience, but that there's also history to be seen. And also the thing with the parks, particularly the Magic Kingdom and the original Disneyland, it was all about Walt Disney like harking back to a different time. Main Street USA, which is the main street of the park, and you're looking over the castle, is it's emulated of his hometown, which is called Marceline in Missouri. And it was an emulation of his hometown when he was growing up. So much of Disney is like nostalgia and looking back to the past. So it's just interesting, this place that is always changing, always about new experiences, new ideas. And people get very upset when they change things. But it's like it's looking back and it's looking forward all in one place.
Absolutely. Well, I think that wraps up our choice of 6 places that we visited that taught us something about America, its story and its history.
Now let's do like 3 extras. No.
Yeah, I think we've run quite long. I just find it interesting to reflect on those places because they're all very different, but they do have some common themes. I think power is a common theme. Each one of these places tells us something about the form that power makes. So you've got the military power of the armies at Gettysburg, the architectural power of Frank Lloyd Wright's vision for Fallingwater, the cultural power of Disney World,
the influence of sometimes just one person.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
Walt Disney,
Frank Lloyd Wright,
we
Joshua
have been
Chamberlain at Gettysburg.
We have been quite focused on influential male figures. We'll have to bring out some influential female figures in future episodes.
Absolutely, but Julia Morgan,
yeah,
California's first licensed female architect who designed Hearst Castle.
But I quite like the idea of it sort of like, and it literally is like Walt Disney's quote, one man's vision, like that one person's vision, this one person's idea, and that's what often is what brings these interesting things to life.
But I think that what all these places kind of show is the fact that, and military historians call it walking the ground, the fact that to truly understand an event of battle or whatever it is, you have to go there and stand there. And I feel that is very much the case with these places that we visited. To fully understand them, you just have to go and visit and stand in the space. It kind of changes the way that history feels.
And it's a kind of, we've touched on it, but like you're going to see these historical sites, you're going to see these buildings. This is why the architecture thing is so great, because often these buildings are in some quite random places. But again, I don't want to sound all like put this on an Instagram quote, but it is like about the experience in getting to those places,
yes.
The road trip that you had to do to get to those places. And then as you're there, being able to walk in the footsteps of history and the experience. There's a reason why I remember the hot tub before we went to Fallingwater, and then the jelly beans. It's just those little things that you pick up on and the little moments. So yeah, this is why it's worth even if you've got someone like Nick in your life that's like, let's go do this random thing that I probably wouldn't have bothered doing, but by saying yes and being like, yeah, and not overthinking it, you just end up having some fun experiences.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining us for this look at 6 places that shaped the America we know today. Couple of things to do. One is do our quiz. If you go to our Instagram page, Epoch America, we're going to have a quiz there about your ideas of historical places, what you look for in a historical place, what it feels like when you are at a historical place. And it'll be fascinating to get your views on that, and we'll look back at what you say at our next episode. And talking of the next episode, this is where we will really start to zoom in on particular American history stories. So tune in, 2 weeks' time. We'll see you there.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.